Enoch Lewis Nucky Johnson was born in 1883, a child of Atlantic City. His world was not one of quiet streets and simple homes. It was a place built on sand and dreams, a bustling resort town that catered to the desires of the wealthy and the hopeful. From his earliest days, Nucky saw the city as a living, breathing thing. It was a place of grand hotels, a sprawling boardwalk, and the endless rhythm of the Atlantic Ocean. He learned its secrets quickly. He understood the flow of money, the whispers of power, and the needs of the people who flocked to its shores for escape and entertainment. This was his kingdom long before he ever wore the crown. His father, Smith E. Johnson, was the sheriff of Atlantic County. This gave young Nucky a front-row seat to the inner workings of power. He wasn't just the son of a lawman, he was the son of a man who understood the delicate dance between law and reality in a town like Atlantic City. He saw firsthand how connections were made, how favors were exchanged, and how influence was the true currency. This early education was invaluable. It taught him that the lines between what was legal and what was necessary were often blurred, especially when it came to keeping the city running smoothly and profitably. He absorbed these lessons silently, watching his father navigate the complex social and political landscape. Nucky was a bright and charismatic boy. He possessed a natural charm that drew people to him. He was tall, well-dressed, and had a smile that could disarm his critics. But beneath that polished exterior was a sharp and calculating mind. He understood human nature. He knew what people wanted, what they feared, and what motivated them. This wasn't something he learned in a classroom. It was knowledge he gained on the streets, in the hotel lobbies, and in the back rooms where the city's real business was conducted. He was a student of people, and his city provided him with an endless supply of subjects to study. This unique combination of background, intelligence, and charm set him on a path destined for greatness or perhaps notoriety. He was not content to simply live in Atlantic City. He wanted to run it. He saw the potential for immense wealth and power, not just for himself, but for the city he loved. He envisioned an Atlantic City that was open for business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a place where the party never stopped and the money never stopped flowing. This vision would become his life's work, a grand and dangerous ambition that would define him and the city for decades to come. Nucky Johnson did not seize power overnight. His rise was a slow, methodical climb up the political ladder. His journey began in earnest in 1905 when his father, the sheriff, appointed him as his undersheriff. This was his first taste of real authority, a position that placed him directly within the machinery of county government. He learned the names, the faces, and the loyalties of every important figure in the region. He was responsible for managing the day-to-day operations, a role that allowed him to build a network of contacts and allies. He was a quick study, and his father's connections opened doors that would have been closed to others. Just a few years later, in 1908, Nucky secured the elected position of Atlantic County Sheriff himself, taking over the role his father had held. This was a significant step. It was his own mandate, a sign that the people and, more importantly, the political machine of Atlantic City trusted him. As sheriff, he was not just a law enforcement officer, he was a power broker. He controlled jobs, licenses, and the selective enforcement of laws. He learned how to use this power to reward his friends and punish his enemies, a fundamental skill for any aspiring political boss. His office became the central hub for the city's operations. His ambition, however, went far beyond the sheriff's office. He set his sights on the real source of power in Atlantic County, the Republican political machine. The organization was controlled by a powerful figure named Louis the Commodore Colonel. Nucky became Colonel's protege, his most trusted lieutenant. He did the Commodore's bidding, learning every aspect of how the machine worked. He collected money, delivered messages, and ensured that the votes came out on election day. He was patient and loyal, absorbing every lesson the old boss had to teach, all while quietly building his own base of support within the organization. The Commodore's reign eventually came to an end in 1911 when he was convicted on corruption charges and sent to prison. This was the moment Nucky had been waiting for. With his mentor out of the picture, he moved swiftly and decisively to fill the power vacuum. He had already laid the groundwork, earning the loyalty of key players and proving his competence. At the young age of 28, Nucky Johnson took control of the entire Republican organization. He was now the undisputed boss of Atlantic City, holding the titles of county treasurer and leader of the political machine. The apprentice had finally become the master. With the reins of power firmly in his hands, Nucky Johnson began to shape Atlantic City in his own image. He wasn't a mayor or a governor, but his influence was far greater than any elected officials. He was the boss, the man who made things happen. His office was not in City Hall, but on the 9th floor of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, overlooking the boardwalk and the ocean. From this luxurious command center, he ran his empire. People from all walks of life, politicians, business owners, job seekers and criminals, would line up for a chance to speak with him, to ask for a favor or to pay their respects. Nucky's system was simple but effective. It was based on a combination of patronage and protection. If you were loyal to him and his organization, you were taken care of. He provided jobs, food and coal to the city's poor and working-class families, ensuring their loyalty on election day. In return, businesses, both legal and illegal, paid a tax or a tribute to his machine. This money funded his political operations and his lavish lifestyle, but it also kept the city running. He saw it as a practical arrangement. He provided the services and the stability, and the city paid him for it. This was the foundation of his immense power. He understood that to maintain control, he needed to have a hand in everything. He controlled the police department, the courts and the city council. No major decision was made without his approval. If a new hotel was to be built, Nucky had to sign off. If a new police chief was to be appointed, Nucky made the choice. This absolute control allowed him to create an environment where his brand of business could thrive. He ensured that the laws that might inconvenience the city's main industries, tourism and entertainment, were rarely enforced. He was the ultimate facilitator, the man who greased the wheels of commerce. This was not a system built on brute force alone, though that was always an option. Nucky preferred to rule through influence and charisma. He was a master negotiator and a keen judge of character. He knew how to make people feel important, how to persuade them that his way was the best way for everyone. He threw extravagant parties, gave generous gifts, and always remembered a name. He was both feared and loved, a benevolent dictator who ruled over his island kingdom with a firm but often gentle hand. His authority was absolute, and for a time his reign seemed unshakable. The arrival of Prohibition in 1920 should have been a disaster for a city built on indulgence. For Nucky Johnson, however, it was the greatest business opportunity of his life. While the rest of the country went dry, Nucky famously declared that Atlantic City would remain wet. He saw the national ban on alcohol not as a restriction but as a golden ticket to unimaginable wealth. He quickly organized a sophisticated system to smuggle, store and distribute illegal liquor. Ships laden with whiskey from Europe and Canada would anchor just offshore, in an area that became known as Rum Row, waiting for smaller, faster boats to bring the precious cargo ashore under the cover of darkness. Nucky became the undisputed king of the bootlegging trade on the East Coast. His control over the local authorities was critical to this success. The police were paid to look the other way, and the Coast Guard was often bribed to ignore the ships lining the horizon. Atlantic City's ports became the primary entry point for illegal alcohol, which was then distributed to cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Chicago. Nucky took a percentage of every bottle that passed through his territory. This single enterprise transformed his already considerable wealth into a massive fortune, making him one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. His operation was not just about smuggling, it was about creating a complete entertainment package. With alcohol flowing freely, Atlantic City became the nation's premier destination for those looking to escape the puritanical restrictions of Prohibition. The city's nightclubs, casinos and brothels operated openly, all under Nucky's protection and all paying him for the privilege. He understood that people didn't just want a drink, they wanted an experience. He ensured that Atlantic City provided it all: glamour, excitement, and the thrill of breaking the law in a place where there were no consequences. The city boomed as never before. This era was the absolute peak of Nucky Johnson's power. He hosted lavish parties at the Ritz where champagne flowed like water and the nation's most famous entertainers performed. He was a celebrity in his own right, known for his custom suits, his chauffeured limousine, and the signature red carnation he wore in his lapel every day. He was more than a political boss. He was the living embodiment of the roaring 20s. He had turned a national crisis into his personal empire, and in doing so he had made Atlantic City the unofficial capital of indulgence, a glittering, decadent jewel on the New Jersey coast. Under Nucky Johnson's unofficial rule, Atlantic City truly earned its nickname, the world's playground. It was, a city meticulously designed to separate tourists from their money, and Nucky was the master architect. Every aspect of the visitor's experience was carefully managed to encourage spending and, honestly, indulgence. The boardwalk was more than just a wooden walkway. It was a stage where the spectacle of leisure was performed daily. Grand hotels like the Ritz-Carlton, the Traymore and the Marlborough Blenheim stood as monuments to luxury, offering a level of opulence that few places in the world could match. Nucky ensured that this spectacle was never interrupted by the inconvenient realities of the law. The city operated on a 24-hour cycle of entertainment. By day, families could enjoy the beaches, the amusement piers and the rolling chairs, but when the sun went down, a different city emerged. This was Nucky's city. The lights of the nightclubs and speakeasies blazed to life, beckoning patrons with the promise of illegal booze, jazz music and glamorous floor shows. Backroom casinos, hidden behind false walls in cigar shops and restaurants, offered games of chance to high rollers. Everything was available for a price. This dual identity, a wholesome family resort by day and a wide-open Sin City by night, was Nucky's greatest achievement. This transformation was no accident. Nucky actively promoted the city's reputation as a place where the rules didn't apply. He understood that the city's economy depended entirely on tourism, and he was willing to do whatever it took to keep the tourists coming. He used his political machine to ensure that the city's infrastructure supported this goal. He made sure the streets were clean, the police were friendly to tourists, and the entertainment was top-notch. He was, in his own way, a brilliant city manager. He provided a product, uninhibited fun, and marketed it to a nation that was hungry for it. The city became a magnet for people from all walks of life. Working-class families from Philadelphia saved up for a weekend at the shore, while wealthy industrialists from New York arrived in private railway cars. Showgirls, movie stars, politicians, and gangsters all mingled in the same hotel lobbies and nightclubs. Nucky presided over it all, a gracious host ensuring that his guests had everything they desired. He had created a bubble, an alternate reality on the Jersey Shore where the Great Depression seemed a distant rumor and the party never had to end. This was Nucky's Atlantic City, a testament to his vision and his corruption. Nucky Johnson's power, was not confined to Atlantic City. His role as the East Coast's premier bootlegger meant he had to build alliances with some of the most notorious criminals of his time. He was, above all, a businessman, and he understood really well the importance of networking. He worked closely with figures like Arnold Rothstein, the New York gambler who allegedly fixed the 1919 World Series, and Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, the ambitious young leaders of the Bugs and Meyer mob. Nucky supplied them with liquor, and in return, they provided him with muscle and access to their vast criminal networks across the country. One of his most significant associates was Al Capone, the infamous boss of the Chicago outfit. While their relationship could be competitive at times, it was mostly built on mutual respect and shared business interests. They were both kings in their own domains, and honestly, they understood the benefits of cooperation. In 1929, Nucky hosted the Atlantic City Conference, a landmark meeting of the nation's most powerful organized crime leaders. Figures like Capone, Lansky, and Charlie Lucky Luciano gathered at the Ritz-Carlton to discuss the future of their illegal enterprises, ultimately forging a national crime syndicate. Nucky, ever the gracious host, solidified his position as a respected peer among the country's top gangsters, but Nucky's influence extended deep into the legitimate world as well. He was the treasurer of Atlantic County, which gave him control over the public purse. He decided which companies received lucrative government contracts for paving roads, building schools, and maintaining the city. These contracts were always awarded to friends and allies, who would then kick back a portion of their profits to Nucky's political machine. This system of graft was, well, an open secret. It was simply the way business was done in Atlantic City. He was the gatekeeper to both the underworld and the world of legitimate commerce. This web of connections made him seem, quite frankly, untouchable. He had politicians in his pocket, from local councilmen all the way up to state senators, and some said national figures. He controlled the judges and the prosecutors, ensuring that any legal troubles faced by his associates could be quietly resolved. His power was a complex tapestry woven from political influence, criminal alliances, and vast financial resources. For nearly 2 decades, this intricate network protected him, allowing him to operate with impunity while building his legend as the benevolent king of the coast. For years, Nucky Johnson's empire seemed absolutely invincible, a fortress of corruption protected by layers of political influence and public adoration. However, as the 1930s wore on, the foundations of his power began to show signs of strain. The end of Prohibition in 1933 was a major blow. While it was a relief for the nation, it eliminated Nucky's most profitable enterprise. The immense river of cash from bootlegging dried up, forcing him to rely more heavily on other sources of income, such as illegal gambling and prostitution. This made his criminal activities more conspicuous and, honestly, less defensible as a public service. At the same time, the federal government, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, began to take a much more aggressive stance against organized crime and political corruption. The era of looking the other way was, well, coming to an end. Federal agencies, particularly the Treasury Department and the IRS, began to scrutinize the finances of major underworld figures. They had successfully prosecuted Al Capone for tax evasion, and they soon turned their attention to other powerful bosses. Nucky Johnson, with his flamboyant lifestyle and well-known untaxed income, was a natural and tempting target for ambitious federal investigators. Public opinion also started to shift. While many Atlantic City residents had long accepted Nucky's rule as a necessary part of the city's success, the hardships of the Great Depression made his extravagant wealth more offensive. Stories of his lavish parties and expensive tastes contrasted sharply with the struggles of ordinary people. Furthermore, newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst, who had a personal grudge against Nucky, began using his media empire to run a relentless campaign against him. Hearst's papers published sensational articles exposing the corruption, vice, and graft that flourished under Johnson's control, turning him into a national symbol of political decay. The pressure mounted from all sides. Locally, political rivals who had long resented his power began to see an opportunity to challenge him. They started cooperating with federal investigators, feeding them information about Nucky's operations and financial dealings. The web of loyalty that Nucky had so carefully constructed over decades began to unravel. The people who had once protected him now saw more benefit in betraying him. The cracks in his empire were widening into chasms, and the untouchable boss was suddenly looking very vulnerable. The system he had perfected was beginning to turn against him. The federal government's investigation into Nucky Johnson was slow, deliberate, and relentless. Led by agents from the Treasury Department, the inquiry focused not on his bootlegging or racketeering, but on the one crime they knew they could prove: tax evasion. For years, Nucky had lived like a king, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars annually on his suites at the Ritz, his custom-tailored clothes, and his chauffeured limousines. Yet he had reported only a modest income on his tax returns, claiming his county treasurer's salary was his primary source of wealth. The discrepancy was just too vast to ignore and provided the perfect opening for prosecutors. The investigation culminated in a grand jury indictment in 1939. Nucky Johnson was charged with evading taxes on approximately $125,000 of income, a massive sum at the time, earned between 1935 and 1937. The trial, held in 1941, was a media sensation. Prosecutors meticulously laid out their case, presenting evidence of Nucky's extravagant spending and tracing the flow of money from illegal gambling rackets and kickbacks directly to him. They brought forward witnesses who had once been loyal to Nucky but were now testifying against him, detailing the system of tribute he had run for decades. The defense argued that the money was political contributions, not personal income, but the evidence was overwhelming. After a hard-fought trial, The jury found him guilty. The king of Atlantic City, the man who had seemed above the law for so long, was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary and fined $20,000. It was honestly a stunning downfall. The man who had controlled every aspect of his city was now just another prisoner in the federal system. He was stripped of his power, his wealth, and his freedom. The Republican machine he had built and commanded for nearly 30 years quickly crumbled without his leadership, and a new generation of political players moved in to take control of what was left of his empire. Nucky served his time at Lewisburg Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He was reportedly a model prisoner, working as an orderly in the prison hospital. He was granted parole after serving just 4 years. Released in August 1945, he returned to Atlantic City, but he was a changed man, and it was a changed city. The war had altered the landscape, and his old network of power was gone. The era of the all-powerful political boss was over. The fall of Nucky Johnson marked the end of an epoch for Atlantic City, a final definitive closing of the chapter on its wildest and most corrupt days. Upon his release from prison, Enoch Johnson returned not to a suite at the Ritz-Carlton, but to a modest life with his wife Flossie, in a simple house owned by his brother. The flamboyant boss, who once wore a fresh carnation every day, was gone, replaced by a quiet, aging man. He took a job in sales for the Richfield Oil Company, a position far removed from the power and glamour he once knew. He lived out the rest of his days in relative obscurity, a ghost haunting the boardwalk that he had once ruled as his personal fiefdom. He rarely spoke of his past, content to let the legend fade into memory as he lived a peaceful private life. Nucky Johnson passed away in 1968 at the age of 85. He was buried in a cemetery in Northfield, New Jersey, just a few miles from the city he had shaped. By the time of his death, Atlantic City was already in a steep decline. The rise of air travel and the allure of destinations like Las Vegas had drawn tourists away. The grand hotels fell into disrepair, and the city that had once been the world's playground became a shadow of its former self. Nucky's corrupt but effective system, which had kept the city vibrant, was gone, and nothing had truly replaced it. His absence was felt in the city's decay. Despite his quiet final years, the legacy of Nucky Johnson endures. He represents a unique and fascinating period in American history, a time when powerful, charismatic bosses could control entire cities, blurring the lines between politics, business, and crime. His story is not just about corruption, it's about the complex relationship between a leader and his community. For decades, the people of Atlantic City accepted his methods because he delivered prosperity and excitement. He was a product of his time and place, a man whose ambition perfectly matched the character of the city he loved. Today, Nucky Johnson is remembered as a complex and contradictory figure. Was he a ruthless gangster or a brilliant, benevolent politician? The truth is that he was both. He was a criminal who cheated on his taxes and profited from vice, but he was also a leader who provided for his constituents and presided over his city's golden age. His story continues to captivate us, immortalized in books and television shows because it is the story of Atlantic City itself, a tale of glamour, ambition, corruption, and the enduring allure of a place built on the edge of the ocean and the edge of the law.